Hi class, this is Susan, and this week we're looking at political philosophy. Um, so some of the ideas we're going to be going over, not in depth with all of them, that's for sure, but certainly some ideas from the Greek times on the ideal state, certainly the natural law ideas of Thomas Aquinas, different social contract theories of Hobbes and Locke, and then some classic 18th century ideas, liberalism, capitalism, utilitarianism, then also the 19th century ideas of communism and anarchy, and we're going to look at two of the 20th century philosophers that I have you reading this week. So again, we're looking at kind of a progression here of what's going on in the from the beginning period, the Greek period, through the Middle Ages. 17th and 18th and 19th centuries are the concentration. So during the time of the early Greeks, we can see that Plato had an idea, and many of his ideas are explored in his book, The Republic, but he believed that the ideal state would be an aristocracy that was run by disinterested philosopher kings and queens, people who could be guardians. He did actually think that women could be guardians, but this wasn't a democracy, and there would still be slaves. So Aristotle had kind of a different idea. He did believe that the state was good to the extent that it allowed citizens to reach a good life. However, he saw that there was a tendency in societies to devolve from a properly ordered society to improper ones. So he saw that there were three legitimate forms of government, the first being monarchy, or rule by one person, but it became problematic if it devolved to tyranny. A plutocracy, which is government by an elite group, devolved when it became an oligarchy. And polity, or limited representation, devolves when it becomes democracy. Aristotle was not a fan of democracy. So a little bit later, a few hundred years later, the Stoics, example here of a Stoic philosopher, Cicero, said there was only one law, the natural law of reason. So St. Augustine saw that the natural law of the Stoics, he kind of interpreted the natural law of the Stoics as being the divine law. Then when we get to the 13th century and the Middle Ages and the era of scholasticism, we see that St. Thomas Aquinas really expands on the idea of what laws govern the world. So he saw that there were four laws. The first, most mysterious, is the eternal law. Some people see that as being God himself, or the eternal law is only known by God because it exists in the divine mind. He saw divine law as God revealed in Scripture, or biblical law, and that was the law that pertained to salvation. Whereas natural law was something that should be used in a reasonable society, and it should follow a principle which would follow the application of this idea that good is to be done and evil avoided. And then human law were the particular laws that was worked out in states. But notice that the natural law is really the kind of what he saw as the guiding principle in human societies. So in the 17th century and the 1600s, we have two philosophers both can be said to have furthered the idea of a social contract, but they kind of have opposing views. So Thomas Hobbes, who saw the world and in its scarcity, that people were battling each other for resources, that the basic state of humanity is that there is no truth, reason, or justice, only fear and violence, every man for himself, every woman for themselves. And in his book, The Leviathan, you've read part of that this week, the whole idea is that to avoid chaos, individuals give themselves over to an all-powerful Leviathan through this social contract. And the only way that you can have order is to let go of certain freedoms. Now, John Locke had a different view of the social contract. We might say that his view of the world was a view of abundance. We can see that the founding fathers really liked John Locke. So he said that we have a natural right, human beings have a natural right to whatever part of our nature that we have mixed our labor with, so that we do have a right to property if we've worked for it. And that the social contract that we see is all citizens consent to be ruled by a government elected by the majority. So in contrast to Hobbes, John Locke saw that there was such a thing as an illegitimate or tyrannical government, and if one existed, then people should revolt against it. Again, in the 18th century, we see also another famous Scottish philosopher, Adam Smith, who wrote about the free market capitalism. And this is often seen as the original point of classic liberalism. So I just want to say this because sometimes people get confused about the term liberal, like liberal versus conservative, and that has a different connotation in the modern world. But in the 18th century, capitalism is a liberal idea. So just chew on that for a bit. Jeremy Bentham, who was a utilitarian, kind of incorporated his utilitarian philosophy into some ideas of political philosophy, like one person, one vote, and really championed democratic ideals, freedom for more, freedom for happiness for more people is a better society. Now, John Stuart Mill, another utilitarian, follower of Jeremy Bentham, who changed some things a little bit. John Stuart Mill was the one who wrote about this laissez-faire attitude or hands-off idea that there are certain things that the government should not interfere with. So we can see here, at least in the UK, a lot of democratic ideas that are at play in our modern society really stem from some of these ideas in the 18th and 19th century. So contrast that with two people from the European continent, Karl Marx from Germany and Pierre-Joseph Proudhon from France, who had different ideas. So Karl Marx famously looked at how material economic reality shapes society, and he saw that history is a history of material conflict. He saw that the problem with capitalism is that it brings about more alienation for the worker, because the person who is laboring to make who is laboring in a factory is more removed from the products of their labor than they might have been in an agrarian society where they had to do everything from start to finish. And he saw that class conflict was inevitable. And he did propose that the best form of both political and economic system was communism. Sharing resources is the best way to avoid history of conflict. So Pierre-Joseph Proudhon was the first person to be called an anarchist philosopher. He said that violence is inevitable in revolution, but that freedom or liberty is a guiding principle. He really thought that only laws there should be is laws to protect people, like physical people, not property rights, because property is theft and property leads to tyranny. But basically, government should only have rules that are very, very limited. So, I have these 7 statements here. So I want you to be thinking about who believed what. I believe that the best form of government is that which produces the greatest benefit for all. I do not believe all people are destined to be governing rulers. I believe there are some people who are especially gifted and should be rulers because of their intellectual gifts, not their personal interest. I believe that the best form of government is one that pools the resources of society and does not allow private ownership to take advantage. I believe that this world should be governed by reason and rationality, and that this principle is in fact inherently part of the world. I believe that government is an agreement between the people and the rulers to enforce laws. I believe in maximum freedom in society where the only laws that exist should exist only to protect the freedoms of people and prevent harm. I believe that people give up liberty for a superior collective through a social contract. So, John Rawls, very famous 20th century political philosopher, who, in a thought experiment, you could see he had a different viewpoint than Thomas Hobbes. He said that really equality has to be the guiding principle. And he saw that what should guide principles of justice is that whatever principles of justice exist, they should be chosen in what he called the veil of ignorance to ensure that no one is advantaged or disadvantaged. It was a kind of a way of being impartial and rational, so that the person making the laws shouldn't know anything in particular about the people that they were making the laws for. But that the principles of justice that would be implied, that would be the best principles of justice, would have 2 rules. One, a liberty principle. And these are direct quotes from the reading. Each person has an equal right to basic liberties. And secondly, an equality principle, which acknowledges that there are social and economic equalities, but they have to be arranged so that they, A, are to everyone's advantage, and B, attached to positions and offices that are open to all in a kind of meritocracy. Second 20th century philosopher is an Aristotle scholar, Martha Nussbaum, and in the article Cultivating Humanity, she defends the idea of multiculturalism and the idea of being a citizen of the world. So I'd be interested to hear what you think of that. So here's my final slide, which is just basically reporting back on the who believed what. So Jeremy Bentham, Plato, Communism, Stoics, John Locke, Anarchy, and Hobbes. Thank you.